Hello, and welcome to the ISM New Jersey webinar series, including all of our ISM members and chapter partners who are joining us today. I'm Kathy Perna, Executive Director at ISM New Jersey. We will be recording today's program, and we will send this in a follow-up email later today with your continuing educational credit. Today's program will be a panel discussion on lessons learned on digital transformation. If you have a question, please be sure to use the chat or the Q&A button, and our speakers will answer your question. I will now turn the program over to our moderator, Joanna Martinez, who is a recognized global procurement and supply chain leader.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm really excited to be back in the game. You know, it always seems like there's a little bit of a winter hiatus, and now there are so many panel discussions and people are starting to meet in person, more virtual meetings like this. And so I'm just thrilled to be here with this incredible panel of people. So we've got James Meads here. James is a consultant and he's the founder of ProcurementSoftware.site, which is going live today. Purvee Kondal is the head of technology and engineering at Albertsons, and she's an advisory board member also for the sourcing industry group, for Loopr AI and RampRate. And we've got David Johnson, who's the head of supplier management at Zoetis. So I am Joanna Martinez, as Kathy said. I'm a longtime procurement leader, and now I'm an advisor, a speaker, and a consultant. I've got a book called A Guide to Positive Disruption, and I wrote it to help companies and individuals make positive changes at work. And digital transformation is a really great positive change. So I was so happy when Kathy asked me to moderate this panel. So my first question is really for everyone. I'm going to ask each of the speakers to take a moment and set the stage by telling the listeners a little bit about yourselves and your roles. And since David is the person next to me on the box on the top of my screen, I'll ask David to start.
Hi, everyone. My name is David Johnson. I am a longtime procurement guy, primarily, well, almost exclusively in technology procurement for 27 years now. I started right out of kindergarten. I look very good for my age. I'm not gonna keep going on that one. But I'm also on the board of ISM New Jersey. Kathy was gracious enough to ask me. She knows how I feel about tech. She knows I'm a huge tech geek and that I've been through a ton of digital transformations in my day. And she thought it would be fun for me to join in this conversation with such wonderful people and hopefully give you guys some insights into what it's like to suffer through or muddle through or thoroughly enjoy a digital transformation. Joanna, do you want me to pass it off to who's next to me on this?
No, the next one is James. James Meads.
Hi, everybody. And as you can probably tell from the accent, I'm not from New Jersey, although I have been there. About 20 years ago, when I still had hair, I had a couple of business trips to Morristown, New Jersey. My background is I started out in procurement in the automotive industry back in 2002 with Jaguar Land Rover, worked for a couple of tier ones after that, and then spent most of my professional career actually in Germany. After the 2008-2009 recession, I moved into the consumer goods space. I wanted to work in an industry a little bit more recession-proof, and there's nothing quite as recession-proof as a company that makes toilet paper. So that was a pretty good career move back at the time. And then I left the corporate world at the end of 2018 to start my own business as a consultant, really because I got frustrated at just how much time I spent as a very well-paid global category manager on administrative tasks. And that really sort of led me into starting what became the ProcureTech podcast, which was a podcast all about digital procurement. After really just realizing and discovering that beyond a lot of the legacy suites, there is so much innovation out there in this space. And so many new startups coming onto the scene, and I wanted to create really a media platform to be able to house that, which then led on to what I've done with the website, which is essentially a directory, free to access directory for anyone on the buy side for procurement tech solutions, specifically with a focus on mid-market businesses, because there's a lot of content aimed at sort of enterprise, but there's not so much really for procurement leaders in mid-sized businesses, especially that doesn't require a corporate subscription or a pay-to-play model. So that's really what I'm focusing on now as I grow that out as more of a media platform, and very happy to be with you today.
Awesome. And Purvee?
Hi, everyone. I'm Purvee Kondal. I head the Technology and Engineering Strategic Sourcing practice here at Albertsons, but I'm also a board member with a few different organizations, including Sourcing Industry Group. So it's been my pleasure to be part of this panel. And Joanna, and thank you so much for thinking of me. I've been doing kind of very similar to my colleagues here, David and James. Being a technologist myself, I've been part of digital transformations, and it's been a what I call a lot of war stories, battle scars, all of those. So it's so exciting to be able to be around on this panel and also talk to people who've gone through a lot of similar challenges and opportunities.
Well, it's great to have you all. So James, let's start with you. What exactly does a business do when it digitizes, right? Everyone talks about digital transformation, but there are businesses large, businesses small. What happens when a company decides it's going to digitize?
Yeah, it's a brilliant question, Joanna, and it's also quite a loaded question, because a lot of businesses just do it wrong from the outset, and a lot of businesses digitize for the sake of digitizing because everybody else is doing it. And I'm going to quote those great philosophers, the Spice Girls. And I think when any company is going out looking at digital transformation, the thing that you need to be thinking, you think that you need to have in your mind is, tell me what you really, really want. If you're a company that's spending 80% of your spend or 80% of your supply base is on direct materials, then you probably don't need a full stack contract management suite. Likewise, if you're a services based business, then you probably don't need a detailed market intel platform that gives you all of that gives you updates on commodity pricing and supply chain traceability and transparency. So going back to Simon Sinek, start with why. What do you want to achieve from it? Because I think if you start with the end in mind and you understand what your goal is at the end of it, it gives you a lot more clarity in terms of starting your RFI process and scouting the marketplace around what you want to achieve from your digital transformation. So, I would say most Fortune 500 companies have done digital transformation to some extent, but a lot of them have done it badly. They've implemented a big bulky suite and done, okay, right, that's done. What's next? That's not digital transformation. It's just implementing a piece of software and praying that it works and that people adopt it. So, the change management is a big part of this. And I know, Purvee, you've got a lot of experience in this from the discussions that we had sort of in the pre-round when we connected for this session. But that is a huge part of it. If you digitize a crappy process, then you have a digital crappy process. So I think it's really around looking at it holistically and not just looking at it as sourcing a piece of software. I think that would be the key takeaway.
You were talking about doing it for the right reasons, and I have to kind of jump in as kind of like I was in a situation with a really large biopharma, a Fortune 100 company, helping them digitize their human resources. And when I looked at the business case, it was the wrong reason. They were doing it because they had a lot of files full of paper on people's backgrounds and resumes and, home information and that kind of thing. And they thought they were trying to go forward with a proposal that would digitize so that they would save space. And I said, well, digitizing is a really great idea for, ease of your employees being able to have self-service, for privacy purposes, for a whole lot of other reasons. But you're not going to save any space because you've got rooms in a building that's 1 million square feet because it has manufacturing and a bunch of other things in it. So, it was the right idea and they did go ahead, but they had to rework their business case because it was right idea, wrong reason. Purvee and David, do you two have any comments on this?
I think
You know,
I think James hit it right on the head, right? It's not just a piece of software being implemented. It's not just it's a full-on review of what you're going to get out of it, your business outcomes, your business experience, right? It's not just the CEO or the CIO was sitting in a meeting with ServiceNow and they now realize there's this cool thing that I just saw. We have to do it. And a lot of digital transformations actually start that way. I have been brought into a CEO's office and said, the Salesforce guy was here and he told me this thing is happening. Can we make it happen? How much is it going to cost? And that's not the right way to do it. That leads to waste. It leads to shelfware, right? You just bought a thing that you can't implement. You don't have the resources to do it, and you didn't really think it out that well. But it's cool, and that's not good enough. That's not a good enough reason for digital transformation in my mind.
David, I want to come back to you in a second, but Purvee, I just want to make sure that I don't close out this question without seeing if you wanted to weigh in.
You know, the one thing I will say is I think that historically, IT technology teams were the ones who made the decisions on what the business, what the product will be. And I think what needs to shift in a digital transformation mindset is also, it's all about the business, right? And going back to the business process to David and James's point of view, right? That if you don't start with the business needs as a foundation, if you're looking at it from a product perspective, because somebody got sold a really nice and sexy tool, it's the wrong thing that we're solving for. And I think that the organizations, doesn't matter who it is, I think they're going to have to shift that mindset to say, how do I serve the business needs? And then you can really be impactful in the digital transformation. Otherwise, we just implemented another, slick licking tool, and it's not going to get the business's, needs met, quite frankly.
Right. So, David, I want to get back to what you were saying before. It felt like you were saying it's helpful to have a catalyst, a burning platform. Can you give me an idea of the kinds of catalysts, the kinds of reasons companies have used to get behind digital transformations?
So, I mean, it could be any number of things. It could be a change to the way that consumers consume, right? Amazon changed the way that people buy. They changed the way that people shop. Mobile phones changed the way that people walk. Like, a lot of cities have changed the timing of their walk, do not walk signs, so they give people a chance to look up from their phones, right? It's a change to behavior. It could be something as simple as a giant boat getting stuck in the Suez Canal that messes up your entire supply chain, and now you realize, oh wow, I have to figure out a new way to do my just-in-time procurement or something like that. Or it could be a global pandemic where everybody is now working from home and you have to find a new way to build out your colleague experience and your customer experience.
So it sounds
those are all viable catalysts, and those are change or die moments, right? But there's also we've been doing this the same way for so long. What's changed in technology, right? Are we looking at the efficiencies? Is there a way for one of these great buzzwords, machine learning, AI, robotic process automation, intelligent automation? Is there a way for any of these things to make this process bigger, better, faster, more efficient? That's the evolve version. That's a catalyst where somebody sits back and says, yeah, there's got to be a better way. And those are the best digital transformations in my perspective, because then you actually take a look at the entirety of a process. You look at it from 10,000 feet and you go, can I pick out these inefficient parts to make it so much better? And then make that 2.0, make that utopia, the optimized version of it. Those are the great digital transformations. And those are the fun ones because you get the best outcome.
It sounds like you're saying that sometimes companies are being proactive, right? They see kind of the future, what the future could be, and they're being proactive. Other times they're being reactive. I never thought of it that way, but maybe those are two of the buckets, the reasons why.
Yeah, absolutely right. Absolutely right. There's this idea that, some companies have around continuous improvement, right? And we force our suppliers to build in efficiencies year over year as we're negotiating contracts, right? I've got a 3-year deal with you and I want it to be 20% less next year. Well, what are we doing to help them with that, right? What are we enabling them to do? Am I enabling you to do AI-based testing, or, you know, replace butts in seats with digital FTEs? That's what we need to focus on. That's one of the things that we need to focus on as procurement people, right? How do we become more involved in digital transformation and help our suppliers and help our customers in the business, our stakeholders, be more effective and efficient and think strategically long-term?
That's great. The idea that it's not just you, it's kind of going through that whole supply chain and looking at, you know, how it can all work better, because if it works better, you know, your business is going to work better. Very good point. James and Purvee, do you want to weigh in on this one before you go off to the next question?
Yeah, just one comment I would add. I think that going back to the original question of what's the catalyst, I think there is so much work, additional workload coming procurement's way. You know, if I look at things like sustainability, ESG, diversity, risk management, you know, with a war literally within a day's drive from where I'm sitting here, all of this is going to create a deluge of compliance and bureaucracy that procurement professionals are going to have to deal with. Now, it's all great hiring extra people to write policies around this, but if then you're just going to dump the workload onto category managers to go out and do it, you either need additional headcount, and let's face it, procurement in most businesses is a pretty lean function. You know, let's not kid ourselves. So, you know, if you go back to the Deloitte 2021 CPO survey, the top priority for the first time wasn't cost, or the first time that I can remember wasn't cost savings. It was improve operational efficiency. So I think the drive of the catalyst for digital transformation is just the sheer amount of additional workload and procurement being asked to do more with less. They're going to have to, it'd be interesting to see what drives it, whether it will be some of these new ESG platforms that can facilitate that, or whether it's just doing the bread and butter stuff more effectively, you know, cheaper, smarter, faster through AI and RPA and all this new technology. But you've got to get more out of your existing resource if you're going to get ahead of the curve. I think that's fundamental. That's going to be what drives it.
One comment I'll add on this is, honestly, the catalyst from what I can see is our stakeholders, our business needs are evolving so much differently and so much faster than it has ever been in the past, right? So the catalyst is also talent change, right? That how we've been doing things from a procurement sourcing perspective for the last 20, 30 years, the business is expecting it to evolve, because guess what? There's all these technologies that are bringing to bear new ways of doing things, different ways of doing things, right? So it is to James's point, right, and David's point, it's a do or die moment, right? If we do not evolve and help push that evolution of digital transformation, we will be pushed to do that. And it's not going to be the way we like it, quite frankly, right? So either we are in the driver's seat driving the transformation and change, or we get basically driven by it.
You know, back to David's point, it sounds like you have a chance to do it proactively, or it will have to be reactively and maybe suboptimal as a result of that. Good point. So the title of this is Lessons Learned, right? The title of this panel. Purvee, what lessons have you learned? What are your observations and what you've seen companies do that have worked and haven't worked?
Great question. So, right, there's companies are always about cultures, right? And so in transformation or change, it's never easy, right? Transformation also, there's two kinds of transformation. You have an incremental transformation, or you have a true transformation where you are changing the way you did things, right? Completely, right? And in either one of those scenarios, change is hard to do. And so it's important to make sure we have the right people on the bus, right? If you have people who are just resisting it, right, that either directly or indirectly, it doesn't serve the purpose, right? And you can bring, right, you have to recognize that you're going to have some people that are going to be early adopters, they're going to be supporters, they'll go along the journey. You're going to have some that are going to be in between, that are going to wait and watch and see what's happening. And then there's going to be some that are just not going to, no matter what you do, no matter how much time, resource, effort you put in, will never change, right? So it's so important to know who's on the bus, right? And recognize, give everybody, assume always good intent, right? I always say to people, start with assume good intent, but observe their actions. If you could see their actions, do not do, they contradict the words they put out, right? Know exactly who's on the bus with you, because if you have the wrong people on the bus, you're going on a journey, they're going to try to derail you, because that's, it's beneficial to them. So be very mindful of that. I think that's one of the lessons I always learn. It's not a one and done kind of thing. I think it's something, right? It's you have to continue to always learn, right? And I think that's one that I would absolutely tell people to go do. Technologies, processes, all of those could be worked out, but people and their change and their behavior, right? It's only upon them, right? I think Gandhi always said, right? Change starts from you. It starts from you within. And in that person, you can lead the horse to the water, but you can't make it drink, right? So just be very mindful of that.
Make sure you have the right people on the bus. I love that. That's going to be, I hope the folks listening in heard that and will make it their mantra. I think that's great. The people aspect is really important. David, what about you in terms of lessons learned?
So for me, it goes back to building out what great looks like. Too often we get bogged down in our day-to-day and we're just looking at the iterative process of change. What are we changing into? Like, I grew up in the 80s. So when I say digital transformation, I think of Transformers, and they transformed right away. But it's not, it's an evolution. It is a slow change. So you should be looking at version 2.0. What's the utopian vision there? What's perfect look like? And then once you get close to that, you should be looking at what 3.0 looks like. So it's a slow iterative change, and it's a slow evolution that makes for, and of course, I'm going to echo Purvee's point. You got to have the right people building that utopia. If the right people aren't on the bus, man, that's great. And I am totally stealing that. You are not going to get very far.
Yeah, I'm half in the game here, and I'm half thinking about my next LinkedIn post, and I guarantee you, Purvee, that will give you credit. James, what about you? You've seen so many different companies with the consulting work that you've done. What are the lessons learned that you take with you now as you go to your next assignments?
I agree completely with what Purvee and David have said. The only thing that I would add is when you're looking at implementing software, a lot of these best of lists and a lot of these sort of ratings websites around software don't really take into account two things that I personally think are just fundamental must-haves, and that is, what's it like to use? If the software has got a poor user experience, then you're going to get lower adoption. And number two, how long does it take to implement it? If you're implementing a piece of software that takes a year to plan and implement, the way that the pace that technology is moving now, it's going to be obsolete by the time you've done it, especially if you're working in a big organization that's got 40, 50 plants scattered all over the world across North America, Europe, Middle East, Africa, Asia Pacific. You need something that's more agile, and maybe even a different solution per region, just based on the languages that are supported and the time of day that their customer success team are available to support. So I think that is often something that gets very much ignored. And some of these solutions providers that you see topping these best of lists, I just scratch my head and think, have they ever spoken to anyone that's used it? Because I just find it astounding, some of these ones that keep coming out on top when you look at user experience and time for implementation, which goes ultimately back to Purvee, what you quite rightly said around change management and having the people on the bus.
It's funny. I actually just saw a client walk away from someone who was up in one of the magic quadrants, because they getting there turned out to be perhaps a good thing for the company in some ways, but a bad thing in terms of how they were projecting themselves and the level of customer service they were getting. So someone said, happy for your great success, but it's not going to be with me, because they were leveraging so much where they were sitting and all the publicity there that they forgot the basics and the fundamentals.
Can I just make one comment on that, right? It goes back to that original point that previously it was IT that made the decisions of making the systematic changes, right? If you look at Hackett's study that came out for CPOs, right, that actually says for the first time, it's actually shifted to say the business, right? The business and the customer experience is what drives, not what IT says, right? IT's prevalence has actually reduced pretty dramatically because, right, the products are different, the technologies, the innovation is different. So it's very important to remember that. And I think that all companies have to shift in that direction, right? It's no longer IT's world.
Yeah. So getting back to James for a second, James, you have had this podcast, right? So you've interviewed all kinds of people and had all kinds of participants. Is there any particular takeaway from your podcast that is relevant to this that you would be able to share with the group?
I think there are two things that stood out to me, or that were the biggest sort of key learnings that I've taken from interviewing, what is it now, just over 50 sort of startup procurement tech startup founders or CMOs or board members. Number one is a lot of these startups are not founded by procurement practitioners or procurement experts. A lot of the founders and the leadership team are either marketing and sales professionals, they're ex top tier consultants, or they're career entrepreneurs. There are very few that are founded by procurement practitioners turned SaaS entrepreneurs. Per Angusta, I guess, is probably the obvious example that stands out, that have been very successful in that space. A few others as well, but they're the one that immediately springs to mind. The other thing is around AI. You know, everyone uses AI. It's a bit of a buzzword. It's a bit cliche. AI is a wonderful tool, but it's not the magic bullet. If you've got a process that is garbage, or if you've got data that is rubbish and that's dirty and there's no process to it, or if you've got a team of B and C players that are implementing the solution, AI is not gonna magically do it for you. People worry, especially maybe older practitioners worry about AI taking their jobs. AI is not going to take your job, but you need to be able to interact with it, and to be able to, the human and the machine working together is really the magic combination. AI does a lot of the spade work. It does a lot of the grunt work that we typically don't like doing. You know, it does a lot of the data crunching. It does a lot of the stuff that, 10 years ago, you would have had a team of consultants just crunching numbers around spend data. AI can do that, but it needs a human to check it, because behind any AI, there is someone that's written the algorithm. And if that person that's written the algorithm fundamentally doesn't understand the subject matter, then, you need a human to correct it, or at least sanity check it. So again, I'm going to do another cheesy music quote, but I'll take a New Jersey musician, seeing as we're doing this for New Jersey. But in the words of John Bon Jovi, if you can get AI to do a lot of the spade work, then we're halfway there. And then you just need the practitioner to sanity check it, to correct where it's wrong, maybe then train the algorithm to go back and do it right the next time. But AI is a wonderful tool, but you need a strong procurement practitioner to be able to check its work and work with it and develop it.
Yeah, James, I think your point, sorry, Joanna.
No, you go right ahead, David.
Your point kind of answers two questions that came up in the chat, right? So I think it was a new Rao that asked how much digital transformation should be aligned with innovation, right? You just spent, 2 minutes talking about an innovative piece of technology that provides that can provide tons of value, that can be innovative and can be kind of on the leading edge for a lot of organizations, or bleeding edge for a lot of organizations, if you want to say that, because it's so brand new. And it could be an innovative way for them to transform their practice, their business processes in a digital way. But at the same time, you're saying the pitfall of that is the second question that came into it. Because Tiffany Scarlett asked, what's a good ratio of practitioner user to decision makers when sourcing and selecting the appropriate technologies? Well, you just answered that. A lot of these software leaders, these software companies that come to present to you, are presenting to non-procurement practitioners. They're presenting to CIOs and marketing directors and people that they meet in the business, and they're not necessarily talking to the right people. So the people who are driving those digital transformations aren't the people who are going to have to live with it every day. I remember not too long ago, I was looking at a spend analysis tool, and I was told we have to use Coupa's spend analysis because Coupa was our P2P product. I did not like Coupa's spend analysis. I was the head of procurement at the time. It wasn't great. Needless to say, I got Coupa, and that was like $300,000 worth of not ever used software. And we're going through the renewal practice, and I said to my leader, I said, check how many times it was accessed by my team. And it was like 4 throughout the course of an entire year. And I was like, nobody likes it. Nobody wants it. It's a little crowded. It's a little busy. You still want to pay for it? Okay. But we're probably not going to use it. We do our spend analysis in Excel because this is crap. So you make the great point that you have to have the right people in the room, right? And I'll quote Hamilton, you got to be in the room where it happens in order to get the right results.
Oh, very
I
good.
I
Go
was
ahead,
gonna
Purvee.
say, I think both of you guys make great points. I've been a big advocate in the market. You know, I keep supplier relationships very close to my heart. And one of the things that I always advocate is talk to procurement people, right? You're going and talking to other parts of the business. They have no idea. Here you are creating all these tools and so that you think are solutions, but you don't understand the business aspect of it. And I think, right, I think it's an important lens. Any providers that are listening out there, I would say, you know, it doesn't matter whether you're using AI or not, right? When you're building a technology, you're building it for a particular function. Take that functional expertise and knowledge into mind. I will also say to the practitioners, quite frankly, right? And so I was in an AI company, and part of the reason, to your point, I was brought in because the AI wasn't matching what the enterprises would match, and the process didn't match, right? So when I went in and, you know, I learned in that whole process, right, that human checking to say, okay, AI saying these suppliers are awesome. And I'm like, yeah, no, not really. No, I would never pick them, right? Or we would never pick them. And we got to a place where I learned that even I had developed my own bias, right? I was thinking that, hey, this particular vendor, no way they could do this. And it turned out as part of our process of, you know, checking their biases, you know, I learned, wow, that they're really capable, right? So I think use the tools and innovation and technology to help us get smarter. I think that's important, but that requires all these different tools and the funding that's going in the market, right? They've got to talk to procurement practitioners. They know that business very well, right? And that you can help them get better at doing it in a better way.
So we're going to get on to education in a second, but I want to add a comment, James, to kind of leverage off what you said about artificial intelligence, what you started. It's the buzzword, right? Everything is AI. It's AI this, it's AI that. And I would urge the people listening in to ask a question when a salesperson comes in and says, well, this is run by AI, powered by artificial intelligence. Ask them what insight you're going to get as a result of the AI that's different from what you would have gotten, you know, 5 years ago. Maybe they can answer it, in which case, great. That's a good sign that it's a true AI application, but maybe they can't answer it. And if they can't, it's either an uneducated salesperson, or quite honestly, it's just somebody else using a buzzword, making it sound like there's AI, maybe even believing that there's AI, but not understanding that perhaps there's not. So, but now let's get to, okay, I'm sorry, somebody just said something.
Yeah, sorry, Joanna. I was just going to add to that. It also, depending on the level of maturity of the AI or the machine learning algorithm that the software solutions provider has, you may have a lot of negotiating potential with that software company if they need your data more than you need their software.
Good point.
Right. So I mean, it's going back to that, because if you're a huge company that's got really valuable data for them to train their ML algorithm, that could give you a lot of leverage in your negotiation with that provider.
Oh, very good. Thank you for that ad. That's really great. So back to making sure the right people are on the bus. You know, sometimes the right people are there, but sometimes the right people are there, but not educated. They don't know, they don't understand. I know I've had countless people come to me and say, I don't understand whatever it is, blockchain, AI, RPA. I don't understand it, but I feel like I'm the only one in the office who doesn't. And I don't want to raise my hand and say that because I don't want anybody to know that I don't get it. I don't think that's the case. I think I find more and more people who emotionally kind of get it or are interested in being part of the digital wave, but don't quite understand what the components give. So how do you train people? What about those people who are inherently, they're good, they're positive, they have the right attitude, but they don't understand the technology or, have never had exposure to this kind of thing before? What kind of training do you do? How do you educate people? So I'll just throw that open to the group for whoever has the first thought on it.
I think you have to meet people where they are. And we all know that there's a wide variety of interest in technology, right? So there are people who are very, very fluent in technology, as is obvious by this group here. And then there are people who are not so fluent. It's not their thing. If you judge a fish by its ability to fly, it's always going to be a dumb fish, right? So I think you have to provide tools that are self-guided. I don't want to put you in a class with a bunch of other people where you will have that trepidation, that fear of asking questions. I'd rather say, hey, take this test. Okay, you didn't score well on this test. This is just between me and you. Why don't you take these classes on LinkedIn Learning or Pluralsight or, wherever, Skillshare, that we've now targeted to your current skill level. And then here are some other areas that you can look at that are on the periphery that might give you some more information. It's the same way you would teach somebody new to Excel or something like that, but you want them to be fluent so that they can be at the baseline with everybody else.
Great.
I can add a little bit. So, it's David, you're 100% right. I'll tell you the part of the reason when I went to the AI company, I did it because there was nothing else that I could find that helped me understand and translate to say, how will AI change my procurement, sourcing functions, right? I wanted to understand that there were unless I wanted to go become an AI engineer all of a sudden this late in my career, which I wasn't willing to, right? There was nothing else available. Everything else was really fluffy, right? Really, really, short-sighted. Most of it's blogs that I could read, right? And it didn't really give me a business context, right? So I learned a lot through that. I learned by doing. I don't recommend everybody does that all the time. And, I was lucky enough that I could, right? But I'll tell you, that 3 years ago, that conversation started, right? I had a couple of universities, right? Very big universities in around the world reach out to me because they saw me as a business person, getting into AI much more deeply than they'd ever, especially procurement. I mean, let's face it, right? Business didn't know anything about it, let alone procurement knowing something about it, right? And they reached out and they said, hey, can we partner to do some kind of a training? And I told them, I said, it's too early, right? It's too early because to David's point, right? We got to meet people where they're at, right? COVID has changed things pretty dramatically, right? I literally last week had another conversation where someone reached out to me saying, remember the thing we talked about, right? And it's sort of that conversation is resurrected. And when I met with them over the weekend, I said, you know what? The market is right. We need business-centric AI training to enable that, right? Because even the stuff that's out there, that's on the sort of, the Skillshare, all that, it's very genericized, right? And to your point, once people get through that, that's a very quick thing, right? That is very easy to get to, but we still need the translation to the business, right? So I'm excited. I think we need a lot more education and training to be provided, to be honest, right? To help translate the two and meet people where they're at, right? We need different scales, different way of learning and understanding.
So James, what are you seeing is a great source of opportunity? Again, I'm going back, you all have, this is a great panel because you all have worked in different businesses and have a wide breadth, but James, with a particularly wide breadth, is there any commonality you see to the sorts of opportunities companies have uncovered or benefits that they've had with digital implementations?
I think it's going to, there are certainly some trends. I think there's obviously going to be a move away from transactional activity as that becomes automated over the next, for the ones at the front of the bell curve over the next sort of 3 years. Over the longer term, in sort of 10 years time, I don't think there will be any companies apart from maybe SMEs or SMBs, as you guys call them, doing very transactional activity in procurement. So I think that's definitely a trend that I see. I do think there are opportunities as well around dismantling the current model of procurement, the architecture of procurement teams. I think that will change. We're already seeing it in some of the front runners. I mean, I saw an ad on LinkedIn last week for BT, who are one of the front runners in terms of digital transformation in procurement, looking for data scientists and data analysts. Pretty much nobody would have been advertising for those roles in procurement a couple of years ago. So that's obviously going to become more apparent. And going back to the last question, the comments from David and Purvee around meet people where they're at. Right, not everyone has the skills to be a data analyst or a data scientist. I certainly don't. I mean, my brain doesn't tick mathematically. I like being able to debate where there's no right or wrong answer. I'm not a sort of very binary person in that regard. But that's not. You're still going to then have people, like me, who are good at humanities that can do the more sort of influence and persuasion, and then have the soft skills to interpret what the AI is spitting out and be able to formulate that into a presentation to convince stakeholders of why the data's telling us one thing, but what does that, translating that into a business outcome, being able to make that transition between tech speak and what people outside of procurement or outside of data analysis and data science understand. So there are some opportunities and some common patterns. I do think if you're not particularly tech savvy and you're a little bit phobic of some of this tech, there are two things that I would say. Number one, if you know how to use SAP and Oracle, then you're not going to have too much trouble using a best of breed procure to pay or e-sourcing solution, because they're so much more user friendly, compared to the interface of ERP systems, which were designed in the 1990s. But the other thing is, well, just maybe take a long look at yourself and think, well, okay, well, what can I transition to in terms of my skill set and where that could be beneficial? Because I think there are going to be less roles for generalists, but that doesn't mean to say that you need to move into a sort of tech-based role if that's not for you. I think project management, for example, is going to be a huge area now as we move to more sort of cross-functional collaboration and SRM and supply chain transparency and all the stuff that's going to come our way with ESG. So there's lots of opportunity. I think it just requires you to think outside of the box, and clearly that's going to be a little bit more difficult if you're coming more towards the end of your career rather than if you're young and hungry and just coming in and looking at career progression. But there are still going to be opportunities for everyone's skill set, and someone with that huge background of experience and skills that they've developed over 30 or whatever years in the industry will still be valuable for interpreting data and communicating that to stakeholders.
I love what you said about the fact that you need a human being to influence, to convince, to educate. I read a fascinating article about AI, where AI enablement has helped, and they were talking about the financial services industry, where in fact, the algorithms, the investment people who used AI-driven algorithms did better, had better results in the end than people who didn't. But the algorithms themselves, the math themselves didn't work because you needed to take those results and adapt them and, look at the people that you're trying to convince or you're trying to get to make decisions, and temper what you're saying based on reading the room and being able to do that. And the AI couldn't do that. It could just spit out an answer in that. And I thought that was a great way of how AI was a wonderful assist, but not someone who's going to take over and just do it all. Purvee, you talked before about the business, the role of the business. So who leads the digital initiatives? Who's or what is the business function that is the right business function, if there is such a thing, to lead this kind of initiative?
So, it's interesting. I would say it's a continued evolution, right? Historically, a lot of transformational decisions were driven by system selections, if you will, right? Versus a business process. So many a times they were really done by the CIOs and, the C-suite, if you will, right? I'll also say that, what I'm observing, especially in the last 3 to 4 years, there is now a enablement happening, top down and bottoms up. Right. So it's happening from both directions, right? The millennial generation and others, right, that are joining the workforce and have been in the workforce for a while, they're expecting different experiences. They're not expecting an old dated experiences. So I'm seeing that push happening on both fronts, right? I will say, however, right, observing, especially for large enterprises, right, having the executive, and when I say, really the CEO and his staff, right, or her staff, if they're not bought onto the idea of digital transformation, it's really not going to work, right? Because the prioritization for the rest of the company and the rest of the organizations is not going to be there. We only have so many finite resources, no matter what size you are, right? So it's always about relentless prioritization. And if the executive team cannot provide that digital transformation being a priority for the organization, that means they have to unlock resources. That means people's time. They have to unlock funding so that people can go procure, do what they need to in order to do this, right? If that's not there, digital transformation isn't going anywhere. I mean, let's truth be told, even if you have a bottoms up pushing up, you're going to get people who are going to be excited. They're going to, they're going to push as much as they can, but if they get blocked at some point, they're going to just say, you know what, I'm going to go somewhere else because someone else actually understands this, right? So I do think it's an interesting time, but I will say that I've always seen that digital transformation, truly transformative stuff, needs an executive alignment and top-down approach.
Very good point. Sometimes that person who doesn't understand is the senior person sitting at the top who doesn't want to raise their hand and say, educate me on this. So we have less than 10 minutes left, and there are 2 questions that I want to make sure get asked. And one of them has to do with technology. So my favorite panel discussions are always around, what's out there, what's new, what's technology that works, what's technology that doesn't work. So have any of you seen enabling technologies that have been particularly effective?
Well,
everybody's thinking.
I can say probably my observation is, right, it's not I think it's an evolution on technology, right? If I think about it from that point of view, so different providers with different solutions, they're at different places in their life cycle, right? Some are in a much more mature curve where they've invested time and resources and effort working with the practitioners to really get better at it. Some are still starting on the journey, right? So I think everyone's at a different place. I always look at, I see a lot of different products and solutions that come through my door, and just even outside of my current role, right? I see that anyway. And I've seen such a big evolution on investments in this area in the last 3 years than I have ever in the past, right? So I'd say my guidance has always been, be willing to listen, be willing to see what they've got to offer and kind of translate it to how it translates to your organization and your needs, and see if it's mature enough to get you where you need to get to, right? And kind of go from there. That'd be my 2 cents.
So with all the possibilities out there, how does someone pick? So for example, there is, James, I think you've done some mapping, right? Where you've got many different players and what they do and how they can affect, or how they can help businesses. Looking at that, or confronted with all of the possibilities, how does a company decide where to start?
Yeah, I could probably spend half an hour talking about this, but I'll try and summarize it in a couple of minutes. So work out your average category manager's salary on your team, and then divide that by the number of working days in the year, and then divide that by 7 or 8 hours a day to get what is their effective hourly rate. So let's just say your procurement category manager's effective hourly rate is, say, $40 an hour. Roughly, yeah, it's maybe a little bit more, but of all of the, and then get them to list all of the different tasks that they do in a day. And then of those tasks, get them to get a fluorescent yellow highlighter pen or whatever to mark the ones that are essentially below their pay grade. How many of those could be delegated to a more junior team member? Or if you don't have one, then could you hire one? You know, how many of those tasks could you just hire someone off Upwork for $15 an hour to do? And then for everything that you can't just delegate, which of those can be automated? And I think that's a good place to start if we're looking at process efficiency. If we're looking more holistically in terms of the more strategic stuff, I think it's really then more around what's driving you. Is it, you know, is it SRM? Is it ESG? Is it, you know, what is it that's driving you to sort of foster more strategic collaboration with your supply base or with your stakeholders, and what platforms can you use to facilitate that?
Great, thank you. David, did you want to weigh in?
Yeah, James made a great point. He stole my thunder a little bit. One of the things that I found as the kickoff point is guy came into a role that I was at, and he brought in a business process mining software, and never seen anything like it before. And I think it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. He watched, with his business process mining software, someone do their day job. And it was one piece of the process that was 57 steps to get one thing partially done. And he took that process map and he said exactly what you just said, James. Which of these things could we have somebody junior do? Which of these things are unnecessary? Which of these things are stupid? Those doesn't relate to the outcome. What do you do? And we pulled that apart from a very high level, and it dropped down significantly to, I want to say, below 20 steps as part of it. And it built the business case for automation. It built the iterative change management towards the evolution of the function, and it freed up tons of time and money. And that's exactly what I would say is that game-changing piece of software. They're out there, you have to find it. But James, you made my point for me. Exactly what I was thinking.
Right. And I think too, there are things out there looking at that holistic supply chain. A few of you talked about end to end, you know, all the time, and it might not be in the end or the part of the chain that we're used to looking at, but there could be, whether it is testing, whether it is freight, whether it is, you know, information coming from the supplier that you're often waiting for, whatever it is. Sometimes that big assist, that big help to you know, reducing back orders and keeping the supply chain running doesn't come from where you expect it to. But sometimes those old-fashioned, you know, analyses, just looking at what are the step-by-step you know, things that happen in this supply chain, and just getting people to think about a supply chain mentality. We all live it every day. Mm-hmm. But it's shocking to me how many businesses that don't make a part, they don't manufacture something, they provide information, they provide a service, they're still loaded with supply chains, but don't always think supply chain. So for those people listening in who might be in the insurance business, financial services business, the real estate business, lots of them out there, take that supply chain mentality you got when you worked for a manufacturing company and apply it there. And you might very well find, you know, breaks in the chain where a piece of technology will help you out. And maybe that's the place to start with your digital transformation. But
yeah, if I was just going to say, Joanna, sorry, if procure to pay or if contract authorization were a manufacturing process, there would be lean consultants crawling all over it, wouldn't there? Let's be honest.
Very good. Very good. So with only a few minutes left, let me ask each of you, and I'll go in the same order as I did in the beginning. Listeners who might want to have a further conversation or want to engage you a little more because they've been interested in something you had to say, how do they connect with you? So we'll start with you, David.
I'm always available. I can be reached. I'll put my email address in the chat. You can reach me on LinkedIn. You can call Kathy, and Kathy can shoot me a text. Like, I'm available.
Great.
Yeah, I do a monthly ISM video chat with called the Supply Chain Information Flow for various procurement focused topics. You know, we'll do one on how to talk to IT. We'll do a couple on negotiation. We'll do some on tech vendor management. Yeah, I'm around.
Great.
And
Okay, good. And James?
Yeah, LinkedIn is the best place, Joanna. Just look me up on LinkedIn and connect. Happy to make new connections there, or look at what we're doing at ProcurementSoftware.site if you just want to get a short list of procurement software solutions according to your criteria quickly and easily.
Good, thank you. Purvee?
So absolutely happy to answer any questions anyone may have. Definitely ping me up on LinkedIn, connect with me over there. If you are in any of the sourcing industry groups, conferences, or any of the chats that they have that I'm participating on, definitely reach out there as well. And, you know, just it's a small world, right? We run into each other a lot. So, you know that we're in it together. So any questions is cannot be left untouched. Let's just say, let's learn from each other.
Great. And Joanna Martinez, the best way to get me is LinkedIn, but there is more than one Joanna Martinez out there. So put in something like Joanna Martinez Procurement and I'll pop up. Anyway, with that, Kathy, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you. Thank you to our terrific panel. That was a great discussion. So thank you, Purvee, David, James, and to you, Joanna, for moderating this session. You put in a lot of time and effort working with the group. And I just want to thank you all for doing this today. And to our audience out there who joined us today, that was fantastic as well. It just makes it for a great discussion. And this time, I just want to say we are recording this program. So the recording link will be posted on LinkedIn, sent to you by email, as well as your CEH for today as well. So at this point, I'd like to close the program, say thank you for joining us, and have a great afternoon, everyone.
thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye, everybody. Thank you all.
Thank you.